It's Elizabeth again. It's been a very eventful last 2 weeks. A lot of big life changes that I can't really talk about right now. Not to sound mysterious, but there you go. Really bad internet, but also setting up for Christmas, as well as the Thanksgiving holidays. So yeah, I'm not dead. I'm very much alive, despite the sicknesses that are trying to destroy me. And I have been reading. All that being said, I haven't been reading very much. A lot of sickness and holidays and life changes have kind of sapped my will to read for the last couple of weeks. So, but I have been reading at least a little bit. I am, for example, still working my way through my rereading of Jayne Eyre, and I will say that out of all of the books that I've read this month, this is just the most comforting. It is just like really good soup for your spirit. The kind of soup that like your mom makes all the time. Not necessarily chicken noodle unless your mom makes a bomb chicken noodle soup. But like, oh, see, my mom made this wonderful tortilla soup that just smells and tastes so delicious. And Jayne Eyre is sort of like that, but for my spirit. So I'm still working my way through this, and I just love it. Every time I read something, I'm just like, oh, it's so good. So that's what I'm doing right now. I also got from Book of the Month Club, and I signed up again exclusively to get this book, Artemis by Andy Weir, the guy that wrote The Martian. Now, here's the thing about The Martian. I finished that book, and I was like, oh my gosh, that was actual science fiction with science. And I was so pumped, and I wanted to read more stuff that was like it, and I just didn't know where to start. So when I found out that he'd written another book, now here's the thing about Andy Weir, he's written a lot of books, but I didn't really know that until I started researching this. When I found out he'd written another book, I tried to find the quickest and cheapest way to get it. Book of the Month Club happened to be it because I used a free trial, and they sent it to me a couple of days before it was actually released in the grand sphere of the market. So this one is about a woman named Jasmine, or Jazz as they call her. She lives on the moon, and she's kind of like a jack of all trades, but has very little motivation for reasons that I do not understand quite yet. But she falls into a life of crime, like very petty crime, but crime nonetheless. And then one day somebody asks her to do like a really big job. So, but the thing is, I love this book because they'll have like, it's just a well-written story that follows well-written story rules. Like, for example, there's this quote, and every time this happens, I like make a note of it. I've read a lot of murder mystery novels, so this is one of the reasons I do this. But there was this quote, like, in the end, the oxygen tanks didn't blow up. Still, Queensland glass was destroyed. A shame, they'd always been solid on fire safety. Never even a single infraction. Bad luck, I guess. Now they'd have to rebuild from scratch. Bullshit, that's not bad luck. Something's gonna happen. Or it's a red herring and it totally is bad luck. But that's the beauty of books like this, is you just don't know, and you gotta keep reading to find out. So I'm really enjoying this so far, and I'm reading that along with Jayne Eyre. So now, the books that I actually did read this month, or since my last update, there's only been 3. Don't really have a whole lot to say about most of them. The first one was an anthology of 365 readings of George McDonald by C.S. Lewis. Okay. I started reading this book because it was my understanding that it was like a miniature essay or a biography of George MacDonald by C.S. Lewis. And C.S. Lewis, if nothing else, is a giant freaking nerd. And I love reading his essays on various different things like stories. I read his essays on Paradise Lost, which really helped me when I was in college because I was writing an essay on Paradise Lost. He's just a very good essayist, and he's also a giant George MacDonald fan, so I was like, oh, okay, well, here we go. No, it's an anthology of George MacDonald quotes. It's not that I didn't like it. I always enjoy really interesting thoughts about Jesus and theology and the Bible and stuff. It's just more that it's not what I was looking for. I still did get stuff from it, but I think I'd probably get more if I actually read the essays and sermons by George MacDonald. The other book that I read was The Girl Who Saved the King of Sweden by Jonasson. Okay. It's sort of like reading a Douglas Adams kind of book. It gave me the same feeling that I got when I was trying to read Douglas Adams, who's his detective? The Holistic Detective Agency. Anyway, there's a show about it. It's actually a really good show. You should watch it. The book, though, kind of didn't really do it for me. He wrote it as an episode of Doctor Who, and you can tell. So reading this book was an awful lot like that. It's about a young African girl who gets kind of in over her head, but never quite in over her head. She's always very clever and can think her way out of it. But she ends up accidentally sending a nuclear bomb from South Africa to Sweden in an attempt to escape from a political situation in South Africa. So she's just literally sitting on this bomb for years. And there's another kid who is an unregistered twin because his dad was absolutely insane and only planned on having one boy, but then they had two. So they gave both of the boys the same name and were like, well, one of them will go to school on some days and the other one will go to school on the other days. Well, the one who's not registered is the more intelligent one and starts working with this girl to kind of, please dear God, try to get rid of this bomb. We don't want to be sitting on this. But then his brother is an idiot political activist. Like, just, oh dear God. And it would have been a more enjoyable book if they had cut out a few of the stories that happened, because it was pretty much consistently they're trying to get rid of this bomb. His brother does something really frustratingly idiotic. They talk about how much they really just want to strangle this brother and the brother's crazy girlfriend, but then they don't. And basically I finished it just to finish it, but by the time I finished it, I just wanted it to be done. The last book that I read, though, was The Year of Living Danishly, My 12 Months Unearthing the Secrets of the World's Happiest Country by Helen Russell. So I mentioned this book before, that I wanted to read it because I'm interested in the Hygge movement, and also I have some friends who are from Denmark. One of whom is one of my best friends. His father is an immigrant from Denmark to America. He himself, my friend, lived in Denmark for a while, just as a thing. And so I'd always kind of been interested in it, plus the Hygge thing. And so I was like, all right, well, I'll look this up. Besides, one of my very favorite genres is also travel biographies or autobiographies, travel memoirs. I love reading about people who are just going into another culture and trying to figure out how to live. And in that sense, this book was not disappointing at all. There were some really hilarious stories about this poor British woman who's just trying to live her life, damn it. And it's funny because her husband is referred to as Lego Man throughout the entire story. Because he works at Lego, that's how they end up there. And I gotta tell you, like, I feel like I identified more with Lego Man than I did with his wife, because he, according to her, in her portrayal, he's the one who was like, let's move to another country, I'm all about this. He's the one who's just sort of like blasé about the crazy crap that happens. And he's also the one that does a lot of retail therapy. So I'm like, you know what, man? You and I feel you on a lot of this stuff, all right? But she's a very good writer. She's very humorous. I enjoyed her voice in the story. I don't necessarily agree with some of her conclusions, just because basically by the end of the book, she's like, oh my God, Denmark is the greatest place ever. And it kind of sounds that way, but I'm not gonna lie, as an American, I think that some things would drive me utterly insane. So the idea is that Danish culture revolves around these 10 laws. And for God's sake, my friend told me what they're called, and I can't remember even how to pronounce them. I'm sorry. But the laws are pretty much along the lines of, you're not to think you're too special, you're not to laugh at any of us. Basically, the sum total of the laws is not necessarily to keep you in place, but to kind of lower your expectations for yourself so that when you exceed them, you feel a lot better about your life. And it's funny because on the one hand, I can understand some of that stuff. If your expectations for things are pretty low, then when you exceed those expectations, you are going to be happier. There's also a lot of, it's the idea that you're not the most important person in the world. That's absolutely true. We should all go through that existential crisis at least once in our lives, because we aren't the most important people in the world. Like, me as an individual, I exist among other people, and those other people are more, I wouldn't say more important than me, but see, that's the American in me speaking, but they are equally as important as me. So as much as I understand that, and I accept it, and I think it's actually a very good way of doing things, I called my friend after reading this, and I was just like, look, man, we gotta talk, because there's a lot of stuff here, and I want to get your input on it. And he kind of confirmed some of the stuff that I've been thinking. Like, as an American, it was incredibly difficult to integrate into that culture, just because there's a lot of things that we believe on a very fundamental level that the Danes do not. But then I also thought that it was interesting because one of the features of the book is that the Danes are very big on tradition, and they're very big on schedules. Like, there's a whole chapter about how there's a giant swingers culture in Denmark, but even those rules, like, even that swingers culture has rules that you can learn about in a class, and then, like, scheduled things that you can go to with your partner so you can go do your swingers life, which is hilarious to me, but also, like, seriously? And so the comment that he made that I thought was really insightful was that they're sort of minimalist to a fault. And in doing so, there isn't a lot of room in their lives for unplanned outsider things. Now, the thing is, we're all human beings, and we're all very different, and so I'm sure that if there's a Dane listening to me say this, they're like, well, that's not true. And if that's the case, I would love to hear from you, because I do want to get more of a nuanced view of what this is. But that's so foreign to me. And it's very interesting. And I will say that, like, there are a lot of things about the way that she described the Danish system that I'm kind of like, yeah, because there is actual scientific evidence that says if you have too many choices, it's actually not very good for you. And it sort of paralyzes you and encourages you to make poorer choices. So I was interested in this idea of, like, cutting out a lot of choices and going towards minimalism and seeing how that affects the way that they do things. But again, I just don't know if I could do it for very long. Because I know that there are some people who've read this book and they're like, oh my god, I want to move to Denmark now. And I'm looking at it and I'm kind of like, maybe for like a year. I don't know. So, besides that weather, I can barely stay in the weather here. Like, not having scheduled hours of sunshine, I can't do that. I have to go on a walk like every day here just so I could get a little bit of sun so I don't hate myself. So, I don't know. But you know what? Power to the Danes. They are the happiest country in the world according to all the statistics. So, you know what? They got something figured out that I don't, and that is fine. I will say, I think the thing that they've actually got figured out is not necessarily happiness, but contentment. They like, the consistent thing in all of the interviews was not necessarily, I am happy all of the time, my emotion is always happy. It's more just, I'm content with how things are. My life is good right now. And yes, there could be some improvements, but mostly, I'm good. And really, that's a good place to be. So I think that the key to happiness is not necessarily happiness, but contentment. That is the thought that I got from this book. All right, I am running over time. I really apologize again. I'm trying so hard to keep these down, guys. It's hard. I talk a lot. But anyway, if you have any thoughts or anything to add about what I've talked about, if you have any suggestions for further reading, or even just suggestions about like articles and things that I can read to talk more about Denmark, or I don't know, George McDonald or whatever, like, please send them my way. I would love to read these things. In the meantime, I will talk to you all later. Bye!